and on behalf of North Central College and the Environmental Studies program, I'm Dr. Paul Bloom, professor of physics here at North Central, and I also teach in the Environmental Studies program. So this evening, we're very lucky we have really world-class experts with us from Argonne National Lab who are going to talk to us about how we can modernize our power grid in order to be prepared for the future. So Dr. Henry Huang is Argonne Distinguished Fellow and Director of the Energy Systems and Infrastructure Division, Analysis Division at Argonne. Wow, I cannot read all, this is a long list of amazing accomplishments. What you need to know is this is somebody who has deep expertise in this area. Right? Same is true of Guenter Conzelmann. He is program lead for energy, environmental, and economic systems at Argonne National Lab, Energy Systems and Infrastructure Analysis Division. And again, he's been working in this area for more than 35 years. These are real experts. If you want to hear about how we proceed with doing what must be done in order to prepare for, politically, I can't say certain things, but for a decarbonized future, this is how we do it. And so I urge you to really pay attention to what these gentlemen have to say. We will also hear from Nicholas Mitchell from Invenergy, who has been working with green energy in the marketplace. And he's going to talk a little bit about the market side of things. And so I think without further ado, so Guenter, you're going to be up first. Yep. Excellent. So would you prefer this or the lapel?
I'll take this one.
Easy
Do you
peasy.
have a clicker? Huh, yeah, here. Fine.
I don't know if that will work on Henry's
Oh,
laptop.
Sorry,
yeah.
my
No
laptop.
problem. All right, hello, everybody. Your laptop, okay, all right. So I'm glad I arrived right on time. I had it in my calendar for 7 o'clock, but it's perfect timing. I guess I just walked right in on time, okay. All right, so we're really excited to be here. And last time I did this 5 years ago, I think. And a lot of things have changed since then. When Paul reached out to me to give this talk again, I thought, hey, I have a new boss, Henry. Henry just joined us, a year and a half ago or something like this. So, and he's a native Napervillian. I don't know who you guys are. I'm from Darien, okay, so I figured, well, let's bring in Henry. He's from Naperville, so we have a bona fide local presence, okay? So, so what we'll talk about today is, I'll sort of start setting the stage, talk about introducing at a higher level our grid as it is right now, and how we got to where we are right now, and then that sort of sets the stage for Henry to talk about where we see things going and what Argonne's working on to help us get to that end point. And yes, originally we said decarbonizing our grid, but given the change in the administration, there's some sensitivities around it, so we had to call it modernizing. But it's in a way, it's about that time, right? So we all know what at the grand scheme of things, what's happening. So I want you to reflect for a moment on your day. Just think about how many things you've done from the time you got up in the morning until now, until you get to this space. And how many things, out of those many things that you have done, how many of those depended on you having access to electricity, wherever you were, whenever you wanted to plug in, and however much you needed, right? And just think about how your life is dependent on that one commodity that just is around. We all take it for granted. We can't see it, we can't smell it, we can't touch it. You better not touch it. But it's there, and it's like it drives everything we do in our days. From the moment the alarm clock goes off until the end of the day when I turn off the lights. It all runs on electricity. The lighting, the appliances, the gadgets, the toys, whatever it is, right? It all depends on this commodity and a functioning infrastructure behind it to provide it to you whenever and wherever you want it. And just think about what life would be without it. We would be sitting here in the dark, just like back in the days when we were dwelling in caves. There would be no modern life without this one thing. And again, it just appears out of the wall, right? But there's a lot of stuff that's behind to make this happen. And so I'm going to talk about real quick where we started about 140 years ago. Started very small in lower Manhattan, where we had our first, what we call a central power station. It's a very small power station. Started on Pearl Street in New York. And at the time, this was so new that people had to be warned that they didn't need matches to light the light bulbs. And instead, you need flip a switch, or in this case, you turn some kind of key, okay? But you didn't need a match. People were not aware of that, okay? Light up until then was everything had to do with a candle or whatever. But that was so new. And so, of course, on the first day, Edison's plant served 400 light bulbs. 400, that was all that was supplied, okay? Within a year, it went up to about 10,000, and 140 years later, we're in the billions. All right? This is a number I found somewhere, 6, 7, 8, whatever it is. But just look around how many light bulbs are in this room alone, right? It's mind-boggling. So it's grown a lot since then. And so this is the backbone of the grid as we know it. And so think of this is the interstate highway system for electricity. Okay? This is where we move things around at long distances. This is what we call the transmission backbone, high voltage transmission backbone. And we make our product, we produce our product in what's called a power generator. And there's a range of different generation technologies that we use to do that, and I'll touch on some of that a little bit. But there's about 20,000 of those spread around the country, often far away from where we live. That's why we need this infrastructure to move things around for many, many miles. And then we take that power and we ship it over 640,000 miles of long distance wires to distribution centers. Think of this as your Amazon fulfillment center. There's about 50 to 60,000 of those. Those are transmission distribution substations where we bring the product from far away, closer to you, around metropolitan areas. There's maybe dozens of those where we bring the power in, and then from there we don't send out our blue trucks like Amazon does, but we use another 6 million miles of wires to take it to your home. That's what ComEd, for example, does. They take it from the bulk power, from the high voltage level, step it down, and then use their wires to bring it to your house. And we serve about 150, 160 million residential customers. There's a lot of homes that we have to supply, plus, of course, all the commercials, all the shopping malls, the office buildings, the movies, whatever. And of course, industrial customers, too. So they all have to be supplied. And altogether, this is about a $5 trillion infrastructure that sits around, if you wanted to rebuild it from scratch. And generates about a $500 billion or so in annual sales. So it's a huge system, very complicated, very complex. And so this is complicated, but this is just scratching the surface, because the physics are complicated, physical infrastructure is complex. But on top of that, we don't just have one grid, although we always talk about one grid. We always say, oh, the grid, okay? But it's really not one grid. At a higher level, we already split it up into 3 parts. The eastern half of the country, the western half of the country, and then our friends in Texas, they want their own grid. Okay? So you might have heard of the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, ERCOT. So that serves mostly Texas. Now, it's not a one-to-one, but more or less. Okay? It's an independent interconnection. And on top of that, we split it even further because we assigned the oversight by making sure that electricity always provided to you reliably. We have 8 reliability regions, so there's a larger coordination going on in those regions. And then we have really where the rubber meets the road is the balancing areas. This is where people are sitting in a control room and making sure balance supply and demand always gets matched up. Okay? There's always a one-to-one match between those two. In addition, we have 9 different organized wholesale markets. Each one has different rules. And I think who's here from Invenergy? Who's our first speaker? Oh, okay, all right, so you'll hear probably a little bit about that. They're very familiar because if they operate in a different, they have wind farms all over the country, they operate in different markets, and so each market has its own little tweaks and rules and whatever. Then we have 180 large utilities serving you, the customer, selling power to you. Like think ComEd, think Pacific Gas Electric in California, Southern California Edison, or think Florida Power and Light down in Florida. Those are the large utilities that serve typically in the million range customers. 1, 2, 3, 10 million customers. But then on top of that, we have more than 3,000 additional organizations that are involved in this. Okay? There's all the publicly owned utilities. There's a ton of those, 2,000. Then there's 900 co-ops, and I think you are a co-op, right? The Naperville co-op. So you're part of that. And then all of that is regulated by not just one regulator, which is FERC at the federal level, but 50 state regulators. So we have a complex physical infrastructure, and then we have a very complex business management infrastructure, okay, that we operate. So it gets really complicated. So what is the purpose of the grid? We want to make sure we serve you whatever you need throughout the day. And the typical household, this is a picture of a typical household consumes power. Here in Illinois, it's low at night, and then as we all wake up, we turn things on, and then at one point in the afternoon when it gets hot in summer, this is July, so when we run our air conditioner at full maximum speed, maximum temperature, then we consume a lot, and then again it goes down. So this is a typical profile for one household. So now we take all the households that live in an area, and all the other customers, like large commercial customers or large industrial customers, like Argonne would be one. A typical household, let's say, somewhere between 5 to 10 kilowatts of peak load. Argonne has a peak load of about 60 megawatts. 20 or 25 of those is just for one thing, an accelerator. And that runs basically nonstop 24/7. So our demand doesn't vary as much. Our demand is a lot more flat throughout the day. Now, if we add all these up, you can see this is for ComEd in a particular year, it varies all the time. Goes up and down, up and down. This is for 8,760 hours throughout the year. And of course, it's high in summer, and low in spring and fall, and a little bit high again in winter when we need more lighting. But so you can see when we sort all of these numbers from the highest point to the lowest point, and we sort them from high to low, you get this curve. And what you can see is, all right, so we sort all of the customers in our footprint, and we sort them from highest from lowest to highest, and we can see that our demand for electricity roughly throughout the year can vary by a factor of 3 or more, from 7,500 to 23,000 megawatt. So that's a fairly large variation, and at every point in time, we always have to have enough power stations running without wasting any energy. We have to run them efficiently. We have to run the best mixer generation technologies. We make sure that we always serve you reliably and at the lowest cost possible. All right, so it gets very complicated very fast because of this. And now we do this by using a range of different technologies. So this is our total generation that we need, because this is basically follows more or less, not always, the demand. And this is a system that's more traditional, where we have we have some hydro, some biomass at the bottom, and then we have nuclear, and then we have a bunch of coal, and then we have gas, and then we have others. So this is sort of like the picture that we had maybe 15, 20 years ago. This happens to be a picture from Germany from 2010. 13 years later, it looks like this. Nuclear is still there, not so much. This is 2021. They shut down all their nuclears about a year or more ago, so nuclear is gone now. So much less coal, a lot of wind, and a lot of solar. Okay? And of course, that varies all the time because any of these technologies, so I think you see Nuclear generates typically around the clock when it's on. Coal can generate also around the clock, but then we have other technologies that, like wind and solar, they go up and down depending on the weather because they're weather-driven technology. So our friend from Invenergy can tell you a lot more about that. Right? Sometimes the wind blows, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it's blue sky, sometimes it's cloudy, and of course during night there's no solar. So it varies all the time. And each one of those technologies has a different way of operating. They vary in terms of how quickly I can turn them up and down. Perhaps I can't even turn them up and down. They vary in terms of cost, how much it costs to build, how much it costs to operate. And of course, more importantly, is they also vary in terms of what the environmental effects are. How many carbon emissions I have if I use it or not, how many sulfur or nitrogen oxide emissions I have, and all that. So it gets complicated, right? So to me, this infrastructure is the ultimate just-in-time delivery system. Because we always have to balance supply and demand at any point in time, and we have to make a very fine balance between that. And here's an example. I'll show you a little video of a disruption. There's something that happens down here in Florida where there's a disruption, all right? And then the whole duration of this is 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 20 seconds. And so what you'll see is how quickly this disturbance shows up in other places. So now it happens, and now a few seconds later, you see the effect up in Canada. A few seconds. Now tell me one thing that you buy every day, or whatever, throughout the year, where something that happens in your supply chain for that product 1,000 miles or 2,000 miles away will immediately impact you within a few seconds. It's nothing. We've all heard about supply chain disruptions, right? Because of COVID over the last few years. But that had to take weeks and weeks and months for it to show up. Right? A lot of us were surprised by what all the disruption, the impact of the disruption was. Here, the disruption happens almost instantaneous because electricity travels so fast. So it really is a super fast system that needs constant balancing. And so therefore, of course, our operators that run this grid, they use a very complicated way of managing the system to make sure, again, we balance supply and demand at all times. And so this is an example from the operating system that runs, where Chicago belongs to PJM. Illinois is both PJM and myself, two large grid operators. We happen to be within PJM footprint. So they do a great job doing this because on average, they keep the lights on 99.94% of the time. On average, you may have the average customer experience roughly about 2 hours of outages a year. A little more than 1 outage a year, and no more than 2 hours. Right? So that's pretty good. 2 hours out of 8,760 hours. To me, that's an amazing performance. Okay? So it's a compliment and respect for these operators. I've been in the operating room, and the guys that run this are amazing. Now, of course, there's downsides. So it's very reliable on a day-to-day basis, but of course, there's things that we're not happy with. One of us is I'll talk to the first one now. So this is the entire energy consumption, production and consumption for the United States. So this is not just for electricity, for everything. So this is, think of it as 100 units. Watts, that's an energy unit. So think of it as 100. So 100 units, big units of energy are flowing through the system. Right? And each one is sort of like saying that moves around. Here's our electricity sector. That's the one I want to zoom in. And if I highlight that, you can see that we use 32 units of fuel. And that's natural gas, that's coal, and that's renewables, and we produce 13 units of electricity. So if you do the math on that, you can see we're wasting roughly about 60% of our energy that's in the fuel. So that's pretty poor performance as far as I'm concerned. We're throwing away 60% of what we're using. It's not even used. It just goes up in the air. That's thermal heat loss, okay? And on top of that, I mean, as we burn, especially natural gas and coal, we have carbon emissions. And so we account for about a quarter of our national carbon emissions, and that's roughly 1.5 gigatons of carbon. So it's a lot of carbon emissions that we produce with this system. In addition, I told you that on average, our reliability on a nice day, our reliability is very good. Roughly about 2 hours. It's going up a little bit. You can see it just had, but it's been around the 2-hour range for a number of years. However, what happens if a hurricane or a winter storm or a wildfire happens, then you see the situation change dramatically from year to year. And so these few years where we have that spike in outages is mostly driven by large extreme events. And it could be hurricanes hitting the Gulf Coast, or it could be a winter storm hitting the Texas area, Texas Panhandle area, or the East Coast. So anytime a big event happens, the grid's not holding up. It's not holding up well enough. Because every time we have millions of customers out, sometimes for an extended period of time. If you lose power for an hour, no big deal. Inconvenience. If you lose power for a day, it's iffy. If you lose power for 2 weeks, that's tough. If you don't have a backup generator in the house. The last time we lost power for 4 days was in 2011 when a tornado hit Downers Grove. And lo and behold, trees were down the block. We lost power. We were out of power for 3 or 4 days. It was in the middle of July. We had no power. And I ran into a friend, right, who lived Lyle. He wasn't Lyle. We ran over to him to get it back, he didn't need it, so he gave it to us. This is how we kept things running, but not the air conditioner. So we were sweating it out for like 3 or 4 days. On top of that, not just nature is a challenge sometimes, the bad guys are out there too, challenging us all the time. The cyber attacks happening all the time, vulnerabilities keep going up and up, attacks are going up and up, and it's a constant battle between the good guys and the bad guys to keep intrusion low and manage the intrusions. And not only cyber attacks, but physical attacks too. Almost 3,000 physical incidents happen all the time. People shooting things up, people trying to destroy things, with the intent to disrupt power supply, either locally or regionally. So it's like, there's challenges all the time, and we have to do better to keep the grid up if we want to maintain that reliability. So in terms of decarbonization and modernizing the grid, so where are we today? This is our fuel mix in 2023. And what you can see is this block and this block, about 60% total, is still from fossil fuels. Mostly natural gas, still some from coal. And then we have wind and solar. Really, it's mostly wind and solar. The other is minor. We have less than a quarter of that. We have the traditional hydropower. That's mostly out west, and it's southeast. And then we have nuclear. Around a fifth of our electricity is produced. It's still nuclear power stations. So that's the set. That's where we are right now, right around now, 2023. Looking back though, so here's the mix in 2023. You can see that the mix has changed dramatically, especially from starting around 2007. That's when things really started changing. So that's like 50 years. And I told you how complicated the system is. How many players there are, how many companies there are, how many assets there are, all kinds of regulatory rules and all that. But so a change like this in a system so complex, it's actually pretty mind-blowing to me. I never thought we could change the grid this quickly, where we go from with one fuel, with the coal, at the beginning was over 50%, and dropped down by a factor of 3 down to 16%. Gas increased by a factor of 2.5 from 17 to 43. Renewables, again, mostly wind and solar, went up by a factor of 8. I mean, that's amazing. That's an amazing rapid change. Now, we all wanted to change more quickly. Because like I said, we still have 1.6 gigatons of carbon emissions. We want to get rid of those, right? eventually. But you can see the system changes. It's just, we want to maintain that momentum, and we may even want to accelerate it. But to me, this is an amazing speed of change. Now, this is another way of looking at it, just contrasting coal, the decline in coal, with the rapid increase in natural gas. And of course, that's driven by a lot of the fracking that happens to increase our natural gas supply, bringing down natural gas prices, making natural gas generation a lot more competitive compared to coal generation. So this is why this is mostly happening. And then, of course, in addition to that, our solar installations have just ballooned. This is like an exponential growth that you see here, right? I mean, so it's a very rapid uptake. Well, of course, we started pretty much from nothing. So, even if it's exponential, it takes a while for it to show up. But once it shows up, I mean, at that growth rate, it's amazing what we've seen here. Right? So in the meantime, the last 2 years, in 2023 and 2024, we installed 40 gigawatts almost each year. And just for comparison, I mean, it's a simplified comparison. But think of a nuclear generator as 1,000 megawatts, as 1 gigawatt. This will be the equivalent of 40 nuclear reactors. It's not a one-to-one, okay? But that's just, for simple calculation. This is here, and this is worldwide. Same exponential growth. So it's a lot of things that happen. In fact, last year we spent almost $800 billion worldwide on renewable installations. 800 billion. This is not a tiny little industry anymore. This is a massive, massive industry. Okay? In 1 year, $800 billion for renewables alone, compared to $80 billion for fossil. 10 times more in renewables than in fossil last year. Totally amazing. I would have never expected that 30 years ago when I first started doing this kind of work. Of course, not surprisingly, where does all of this happen? In China. 60% of all of this is happening right there. They're the world leaders in installations, they're the world leaders in manufacturing, the world leaders in exporting this technology worldwide. Similar story in wind. This is maybe not as exponential, not as rapid, but still a very dramatic increase in wind installations, where we're now around 160 gigawatts of wind installation, compared to solar, which was, for many years, wind was there. We had a lot more wind installations than solar installations. In the meantime, solar overtook wind. Because it sort of is a slower, we entered a few years where it was a slower rate of installation. But still amazing. And again, same picture as worldwide as well. In the meantime, we have a terawatt of wind power stations installed worldwide. Again, a number that, when I started working in Argonne in 1990, if I had said in 30 years we could have this much wind and this much solar installed, it would have not mattered who I would talk to, they would all laugh at me. Nobody would have taken me serious if I had mentioned those numbers. So in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, that's one of the things that we're concerned about, is actually our emissions overall nationwide have declined since 2007. Again, this sort of coincides with that change, right, that we saw in the electric sector, in the industry. But overall, I mean, this is all sectors now. All sectors, all fuels, our national emissions have started to decline from here down to here by about 16%. And in the meantime, we're even below our 1990 level, so 30-something years ago. In 1990, often is used as a base year, a baseline year for climate change negotiations. So that's significant too. If we zoom in into the electric sector only for electricity generation, we see it's even more dramatic. So we dropped from 2,500 gigatons to 1,600 gigatons, or a 36% drop in 15 years. That is, to me, that's wow, actually. There's not a lot of industrialized countries that actually can show that drop. And even compared to 1990, we're already 16% below 1990 level for our power industry. And so a lot of these changes, you might ask, okay, so why is this happening? Well, I showed you some of the earlier charts, right? I mean, gas is replacing coal, renewables is replacing the fossil fuels. So about 2/3 of it has to do with natural gas switch replacing coal, because natural gas, because of the increase in domestic supplies, natural gas prices have come down from early in the decade, early in the century, in the 2000s, become much more competitive compared to coal, and so therefore a lot of it has to do with that's fuel switching alone. And then natural gas power stations the old natural gas fired power stations have been replaced with brand new ones, which are much more efficient than the old ones. And so we also gained some there, and then 40% of our carbon reductions that we saw had to do with wind and solar. So 40% alone from renewables, 60% from that switch from coal to gas. All right, so this is where we're at. And now we want to look at, well, what does the future bring? And, you know, I've been in forecasting, I don't call it forecasting, I've been in projecting future possibilities for 30 years or so, and what I know is I'm always wrong. That's the one thing I can guarantee you for sure. Okay, so usually I consult this guy. I take a few quarters, stick it in, and have Zoltar use his magic crystal ball and tell me what I should say, okay? Now, I don't have Zoltar with me here, so the second best thing what I have is I have Henry now come out and talk about what is next, okay? So Henry is our Zoltar stand-in, okay?
So Guan, that's a great job. I don't know among the three of us, I don't know who's the best. So we'll see.
Zoltar is the best.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much, NCC and the NAS for this invitation. Paul, Maureen, and Tad. So this is an honor to be here today, especially as a new resident in Naperville. I don't know if I already told you before, we moved here last July. So this is really our first winter, and then the whole family has been really enjoying the neighborhood. By the way, we are not far away from Highlands Elementary School. So maybe some of you be my neighbors, so we will see each other in some grocery stores or somewhere, right? Now, let me say this. So, Guenter gave us a great picture of how the power grid been evolving from 140 years ago to today. Now, if I can summarize into three bigger points, it's three bigger things we have to look into the power grid. One, we have to have enough power somewhere, right? Whether it's natural gas, nuclear, wind and solar, maybe geothermal. So that's the first most important. How can we get enough resources? And the second is really what we want to be emphasizing. The whole power grid is really balancing act. You have to consume almost what's been generated at the same time. So that is really challenging. Imagine that balancing act. You know, I was sweaty when I was looking at those bigger shows and how the people can work on the thin wire in the air. So that's how we do it is every day with the power grid. And third thing is really the backup. As you can see already, so we have a good backup. So actually we get this going. So backup is a key. It's a key for the power grid. All right. So if you lose some of the generation, what can we do with it? So with that, again, I guess no one can really predict the future. So I'm setting some numbers, so not really for me or from Guenter or from that guy in the box. So some numbers are being put out by DOE. They say we need 1,000 gigawatt or more renewables and almost 1,000 gigawatt energy storage, as in this report. So there's a picture from the report. Also in the mix with some of these conventional resources like a nuclear, hydro, and natural gas and so on. Now, of course, as we all know, we are in this special time. Things being in a lot of discussion. What's the future, and then whether really be 1,000 gigawatt renewable or 1,000 gigawatt something else. But regardless, I think the point here we need more power. So that is the key thing. Again, as Guenter mentioned, that's one of the fundamentals for the power grid. And hydrogen could be a bigger player in this whole energy picture. So this is from IEA report. Hydrogen growth will be almost 5 times by 2050. And a lot of those will be used as energy, not as we've been using hydrogen for in the past. It's fertilizers and chemicals. So those are more traditional use of hydrogen, but the new is more use of energy. And then if you need more power, and then the next question would be the power grid need to grow, need to be expanded. So how can we do that? That's another big challenge. Now the whole thing, why we need more power, we need a bigger power grid, is because we as the consumers need more power. So demand is growing. You look at the EVs, how much that people put in the system, how much heating being electrified, and how many data centers being put up across the world, which I'll have a one slide touch on that. It's amazing, the growth. So double of the demand is what people getting to build consensus on. That's how much we need for the future. So with that, with the grid is really facing a lot of challenge, right? So again, where to find enough power resources, how to make sure we still maintain the balancing act, and then how to find a backup. So I will show you a few things and then see what do we do at Argonne and also in general in this whole space to improve the system moving forward. So the 3 pictures highlight the challenges. The first picture is done by McKinsey. They say the data center demand will grow by 4 times from today to 2050. And then the number over there is 600 terawatt hour. It may not mean much, it's just a bigger number. But put it in the context, it's 100,000 homes for a year. So that's how much energy is growing, for those data centers. It's a huge demand. The lower picture is there's a cyber instance in the power grid. So how people trying to hack into the system and trying to cause trouble to the operation of the power grid. You can see it's a growing trend over the years. And then this last massive picture is about extreme event. I want to mention that there's a lot more extreme event going in the system. Is both, well, what's in the massive picture is flooding, wildfires, extreme heat, extreme cold, all those kind of events, right? But what's the important message here is it's growing trend. So that's one message. Another message is a growing cost caused by those events. So this has really become a bigger issue, how we need to look into this, build the future power grid to be more reliable and resilient. So we see there's 3 layers of things we need to work on. One is at a big scale, the power grid relies on many other systems. And then if other system fails, there's very likely there'll be trouble in the power grid. For example, we have a lot of natural gas generation. There may be the largest portion in the picture Guenter showed. Now, if you imagine if natural gas system has a problem, gas leaking or pipeline being broken somewhere, then there's no natural gas flowing into the gas power plant. Then we are losing generation. So that's the interdependency of the power grid with other systems. Same thing for transportation. A lot more EVs in the system. You have a lot more charging stations. Your neighborhood may be stressed. Some people charging, and then I will breaking down the local power grid, and then you will have outage. Even you're not using EV, but your neighbor may using EVs. But don't blame your neighbors; it's not their fault. It's the fault of the system, right? So that's what we need to do. The interdependency, weather. The power grid depends on weather so much. Both the resource, wind and solar, even natural gas, being frozen in Texas 3 years ago or 4 years ago, right? You cannot use the natural gas wells to get the gas to the power plant. So that's the weather dependency, and also weather dependency for the demand. If it's a hot day, a lot of AC turn on, and then so the load they will go up as well. So there's a lot of that dependency. So that's the big highest level. I call it G plus X. So the power grid plus what other systems we need to deal with. And another one is the power grid itself, all the way from a big backbone power grid and the little power grid lower voltage system, called one's called transmission, one's called distribution, as Guenter mentioned earlier. That system needs to be expanded and optimized so we can really run it in a way with more capacity and more reliable conditions. So that itself needs to be done. That's the G plus G, T, and D, right? So that's the next layer. And the last one is there's a lot of little things we put in the system. The little X. Little X here can be your EV, it can be your house appliances, it can be some of the storage. Someone mentioned the storage in your house, or maybe EV has storage. So how that going to be integrated into the system? Maybe the local backup generation. Someone mentioned you have a generation for basement. So that also has connection to the power grid. Now the problem is not because they can function in the way the function is designed. The problem is that in old days, we don't need to deal with those little things. They're really passive consuming devices. As long as we have a power line to the device, to your home, you're happy, right? So you can just use the power as you don't even think about it. The problem is they become more active. They're intelligent. Once they can become intelligent, then it's hard to manage. So that's the balance. You want them to be intelligent, but then once they become smart, then it's hard to manage them. So that's a bigger challenge. So in the past, only need to manage about a few thousand big power plants. Now we have to manage millions of the little things. Just to put into context, in the United States, we have 200 million households. Imagine every household becomes smart. So you have 200 million little things you have to deal with. So that's a challenge. So let me give you just a quick highlights. I want to make sure I finish a little bit faster, and then make sure Nick has the time to present, and also make a time for a little bit of question and conversation. So at the highest level, we need to look at all different systems of the power grid versus other systems. Natural gas, as I mentioned, transportation, and even communication is a problem, like cybersecurity issues. You can see there's a lot of this in those circles, and then they're not independent systems. They are working together as they are affecting the power grid. And then so we have developed models for those systems, and then we'll be able to simulate them and study them together, look at the interdependency. We help a lot of the power companies in the NERC and the FERC. NERC is the North American Electricity Reliability Corporation. They are really in charge of the whole United States and even North America power system, make sure they're reliable. And the FERC is the Federal Energy Regulatory Council. That's the entity really make sure the power companies, the grid, operate to the standards, and they have make sure that everybody complies, right? So those are the entities and the companies we help with to figure out how we can look at the impact and how we may be able to put the measures in place so the system is more reliable. So this is one of those examples. Is the interdependency between natural gas and the power grid. What this shows is because there's a failure in the natural gas system, how much electricity will be lost. So the blue bars in different regions shows the impact be different regions, but look at the numbers, it's significant. Florida has the highest bar. The blue bar there is 18,000 megawatts. So that's a lot. The biggest outage the power grid is designed to be able to sustain is about 2,000 megawatts. If you lose 18,000, nobody can back that up. And so we're talking about backup is a key thing, right? So that's the important message, is how can we really make sure the grid is reliable from that perspective. And the weather has another important impact, as already mentioned. At Argonne, we have the highest resolution weather data, so we can really study the weather in great detail. It's in the kilometer, every 2 or 4 kilometer resolution. So we can study how the weather may be affecting the neighborhood, how the weather may be affecting the wind turbines, solar generation, So that is the important area we're looking at, and especially with so many extreme events. So this one is the flooding study. So if there's extreme weather, how the flooding actually would damage power system equipment. Maybe you have a transformer somewhere sitting on the ground, but if it's a low ground, then you can imagine the water can, flood it, and then now your transformer is out. Once the transformer is out, then all the lines will not be able to transmit any electricity, right? So that is a big challenge, and we're doing that. And then now the middle one, how to expand the power grid and really make sure it runs well. It's a really, really massive picture. I don't mean for you to test the eyesight, look into the boxes, but I will just highlight one big message. Is if you want to have a transformer at the end for the power grid, where transformer come from? It coming all the way from the mining somewhere. You need to get the ore, and then you get the materials, and then you build this devices, and then you transport to somewhere, assemble the devices in the transformer, right? So this whole supply chain process, very complex. That's one message. And second is lot of the steps. It can be affected by a lot of reasons. It can be the scarcity of the resources. It can be the global security issues, right? Some country can choose certain elements, you may not be able to get it. And then, so that is a really complex issue. And then today, if you want to order a bigger transformer, like you see in the bigger backbone power grid, it takes 2 to 4 years to get it. That's just unimaginable. How can you have the outage for 2 to 4 years? As Guenter mentioned, 2 hours is about what we are today, and then if you lose power for a week, then you're going to be crazy, right, these days. So that's one big issue. We have at Argonne, we have teams working on the supply chain issues, help DOE, help industry, really analyze the steps, and then where is really the bottleneck, and how to mitigate those bottlenecks. Another one is if you want to build a bigger power grid, then you have to decide where to build, right? So there's two kind of studies you need to run. One is you need to figure out point A and B. If that's, between A and B, you need a line because of there's a resource here and then demand here, then you have a line to transfer the electricity, right? Now that's A and B, so that's one study. It's more or less like straight line. So that's relatively easy to see that on the map, but it's not the straight line we're going to build actually on the ground, right? So imagine there may be a lake in between. There may be reserves you cannot cross. There may be military bases you cannot use. There may be just the terrain is too difficult to build any power lines. There could be geological issues. The land is, or the earth is not stable to build anything big. So you have to really figure out where to route this actual power line. So we have a tool called a GEM, a geospatial mapping, energy mapping tool, and we can really look at a lot of layers of information, 20, 40 layers of information to figure out where would be the actual locations you can route the line from A to B, not just A to B as you see draw the line on the map. So that's one thing we're doing, and then we are really using this to help you to figure out where be the critical transmission corridors for the bigger power system. Now the importance of that is there's a US law. If a power line is being designated as a critical transmission corridor, then it doesn't have to go through step-by-step permitting process. Imagine that implication. So today, let me tell you, if you want to build a line across multiple states, just a permitting state by state, it takes 5 to 7 years. Just that step. So there's a lot of challenges beyond even the technology itself, with policy and other things being involved. And now let's talk about the little things. So there's a lot of little things going on. Then what we need to do is, first of all, we need to understand it. How these little things actually change the power grid behavior. And then to understand it, then we model the little power grid with houses, with EV in the house, or the TVs on the roof, and you have appliances and so on. Model those things, and then we connect that model with the bigger power grid. And finally, the behaviors of these millions of little things can be reflected on the bigger power grid. So that is an important capability. It's called transmission and distribution co-simulation. So that's the coupled behavior between the little power grid and the bigger power grid. And then with that, we can study a lot of things. How we can make sure whenever it's charging the EV at a certain time, we know that. Then we can either prepare the grid to be able to handle the peak power consumption, or either we can manage charging. Don't charge all at the same time. Can you make it random? It can be better, which actually is my next slide I'm going to show you. So if ever charge at the same time, it's a peak, it's really high, that means the system needs to at least build to that capacity. But only for that few hours, right? So you're not needing that for the rest of the time. It's a lot of cost to build that kind of capacity. Or you maybe run with a certain policy, you can smooth out, spread out across time, because the peak is reduced, right? So that is the key thing, how we can actually run this better with those devices. And then this is even bigger scale, besides just the little EVs, then we can look at the thousands of households and little meter points, and then get the behaviors of those power consumption at different houses, and then can reflect into the tools we use to operate the system, so it can be much better to see the behavior. Now I have to say one more thing, and to end the presentation. Everybody talk about AI machine learning. So without doing that, I don't feel we finished, right? So there's a lot of ways to use AI for the power grid operations and planning. The power grid become much more complex because a lot of the faster dynamics get into the system, the power electronics, which is much faster than just mechanical devices. That the paper back in 2020 is the power electronics will be everywhere in the system, so it makes the system really complex. And the second is really need more data to really observe those fast dynamics, right? And then that's a result of the data explosion. Now with more data, then AI is really a good tool we can use to help the power grid. So we have applied AI, machine learning, for a lot of different things. As you see the laundry list here, I'm not going to speak to those details, but just to show you we have used that. I have to tell you another story. Is AI machine learning is useful for us. Maybe for many of you as well, right? Use it for different ways. I'm sure you can have a lot of good ways of using AI machine learning. Chat GPT, you can just ask a question to give you maybe a smart answer, hopefully. But the other side of the story is giving the AI machine learning becomes so popular, and then people build more and more data centers. Again, where do you get the power? There's a lot of news you maybe heard that Google and Amazon talk about, okay, how about just building nuclear power plants, small nuclear power plants side by side with my data centers? Not small data centers, the several hundred megawatts or maybe 1,000 megawatts data centers, they're huge. Now back to what I said earlier, if you want to do that, that's fine, but what about your backup? How can you back up 1,000 megawatt generation in that single location, right? So it's not just as simple as, oh, I just built my small modular reactor with my data centers, right? So that's a challenge. And then second, how can we still make sure the balancing act? Nuclear power plant, they're good at generating steady power. They cannot easily go up and down. That's the feature of nuclear power generation, right? So your data center consumption depends on what it's doing. It could go up and down. This number shows could be 20% fluctuation. So again, that's a balancing act issues. We cannot do that. And then if you really want to make sure it's running well, then you have to have water to support the nuclear power plant or natural gas power plant, because they both consume a lot of water. And even the data center itself consumes a lot of water for cooling purposes. So combined with the issues, this AI power and the water nexus issue we have to resolve. And that's again, involve a lot of the issues as I listed on the slide, and then you can see the number of people estimated how many more times of power and water we have to supply. So I guess my part is a little bit less optimistic. I think I want to give you really good information. The grid has been running for 140 years, no problem, 99.9+% reliability. But I'm coming up and saying, okay, there's a lot of issues to deal with, right? But I want end with a positive note, though. So I think that's where the place we need more talents. Maybe some of you, in the college, maybe you are interested in this area. Please do, look into this. If you need help or need information, reach out to us. We're happy to help, with any of this. And then also we need people from all over the different domains. Maybe some of you in some of the domains may be relevant. Either you are in AI machine learning, or you are in renewable deployment, system operation, market management, in Invenergy, and have been doing a great job in those areas. Or even just look at how each of you businesses consuming power. So as we come together, I'm sure we can manage this system. We've been doing this for 140 years. I'm sure we can do this for the next 50 years or 100 years. So with that, I will yield the place to Nicholas to finish with an even more positive note.
You need power.
Good. You might as well.
Feel rich. Just
Right, I'm nervous about the chords, but I'm going to do my best to be gentle with them. Good evening, everyone. My name is Nicholas Mitchell. I guess before I get into an intro about me, just wanted to say thanks to Morning Bruce and all of the team at NAS for inviting me. Really excited to be here. In general, kind of my background and why I'm here is just from a deep care for environmental and climate change challenges that our society is facing. And that's something that I was able to do some work with Nest on when I was a Naperville resident prior to now, where I'm living in Chicago. But I carry that passion with me into my work with Invenergy, where I work for our business unit selling solar, wind, natural gas, battery energy storage, and a couple other cool types of energy solutions that we provide. Invenergy is the world's largest privately held developer, owner, and operator of these energy solutions. We like to call ourselves the largest energy company you may not have heard of, although that's not always true in and around Chicago, since that's where we're headquartered. But we've built over 220 projects, over 33 gigawatts of power interconnected onto the grid. Some of those we own and operate. Some of them we also will build and sell to a utility customer or something like that. But happy to talk more about the company, some in the Q&A as well and throughout the presentation. But let's get into it here. Tonight I wanted to talk about navigating the energy market landscape. And so some of this I think is going to build on some things that we've already talked about earlier tonight. So I think this is a kind of fortuitous chart building off the U.S. Breakdown that Guenter had shown. This is Illinois' energy generation profile as of 2023. One of the differences you might notice here compared to the chart we were looking at earlier is a 54% nuclear. Illinois is the most highly nuclear generating state in the country. And then from there following is natural gas, coal, and wind. 16, 15, and 12% respectively. I think the interesting thing here with this 15%, and this does mirror that national trend that Guenter had showed, with the decrease from 46% in 2009 down to 15% as of 2023. That's a significant amount of coal plants coming offline. So 9 gigawatts, nearly a third of which came off in 2022 alone. So it's a lot of this aging coal fleet that we've seen kind of reach the end of its useful life. But instead of like maybe what happened previously, whereas a coal plant would come offline, we put a new one online to replace it, the interconnection queue now is entirely full of wind, solar, and natural gas. And that's because those are the types of technologies right now that are most economic. They're getting the most capital from large investment firms. And so the market is looking to integrating these solutions into the grid. And so that kind of results in this general trend we've seen with the decrease in coal. But taking a step back, we talked some about how there's all these different grids kind of overlaying with one another. One of these key ones is the RTOs and ISOs. There's some nuanced differences between them, but I'll refer to them kind of as one group. So the independent system operators, or ISOs, one of the key responsibilities they have is to act as the administrator for the grid. So in a lot of ways, they keep the lights on across a large geographic region. And then at the more local level, there will be some utility services to make sure that local transmission lines are upheld, so that overall grid balancing happens at this type of a level. And so for Naperville, located in the PJM region, that kind of means that PJM is responsible for keeping the lights on, essentially matching the generation with Naperville's energy consumption. So I think that we've already done a really good job of talking about how the grid works from a technical standpoint, but I want to provide a kind of metaphor that I think is helpful to think about how the energy flows. I think that there's often a misconception that we have like a natural gas plant here that's producing energy. That energy is going along a wire to my house, and then I press a switch, and as a result of this burning the gas, my light is turning on. But that's not exactly how it works. And one metaphor that I think is helpful for that is imagining the electric grid as kind of like a big pool. And so you have all of these different generators that in aggregate are adding their electrons to the pool. So each one of them might have like a bucket, and they would dump their bucket of electrons into the pool. And then all of the different buyers would come with their bucket and go, I need my energy to do whatever I want to do to heat my warehouse or to turn all the lights on in my school. And then they would go in and they would scoop out their water. But the water that they're scooping out of this pool, all of those electrons aren't going to be a one-to-one match for the electrons of any one generator. And that's because when the electrons are going into the pool, they all mix around together and they're part of this general electrified system. And I think this is important to remember and think about, because it's a more complicated system, and because you can't trace any one individual electron, you don't know exactly where that energy is coming from. And what PJM does here is they kind of act as like a lifeguard or the pool manager, making sure that the generators who said that they were going to dump the water in have added theirs to the pool, and making sure that there's enough for all the buyers to get out the amount that they're looking for. But then on top of this, so if there's a technical level to the grid where there's electrons being added and electrons being taken off, on top of this, there's a whole different world of financial markets that are abstracted and different from what we actually see in how the grid functions. And so laying on top of this, you'll have a series of contractual arrangements where different energy buyers are linking up with different generators and purchasing the power. Even if they aren't actually buying the exact same electrons, they can account for the electrons that are added and the electrons that are taken off and financially square up to the amount that's being used. And so it results in kind of a weird version where you are paying for the power, and the power is being generated, but the power you're using isn't necessarily the same. And so I think that it's important to recognize this because that distinction can sometimes get us confused about like what the actual financial structure is versus what the technical structure is of the entity. And this is all well and good, and it's, as we have seen, it works, but to some of the changes that Henry's mentioned, all of this is changing now. And it's because of data centers. After a long history of relatively flat demand growth, we're seeing now, the first time in many decades, load forecasts being projected by utilities that are at times doubling their expected energy demand. So they're saying all of the electricity that's being used right now in my area, I'm going to need to double that. And sometimes they're saying that in the next 5 years. And so that means that for all of these energy buyers here, it's essentially these data centers are coming in and saying, we have more buckets, we have bigger buckets, and we're going to be scooping out of the pool as fast as we possibly can to power these data centers. And that results in, on the other side, the generators having to scramble to figure out how do we provide enough power to meet this demand. And so it's resulted in a really fascinating bottleneck in that I think all of the big tech companies didn't really see coming. Where a year ago, you look at these tech companies, they're not talking about energy. But in the past year alone, all of them started cluing into, oh my gosh, this is the pinch point for me to gobble up as much market share as I can in this new AI cloud computing world. I want to do this. I need energy. And so they're doing these crazy things. We see them kind of reaching out and striking deals with as many different types of energy providers that they possibly can. So I mentioned the SMRs. They're looking at SMRs. They're reopening shuttered nuclear sites and trying to get those back online to meet their needs. But they're not stopping at nuclear. They're buying as much solar, as much wind, as much battery storage, natural gas, you name it. They are signing deals with brand new companies who are prospecting geothermal sites out west. They're looking at just kind of this wide array of anything we can try, we're going to purchase it and see if we can buy it. And so it makes for a really fascinating time because they're considering lots of options and they're very hungry for power. So a company like Invenergy that produces projects that generate power, it's a really great time to be in that position because when the demand signal is really high, it means everybody's looking for supply. So I think one of the kind of interesting things about data centers here that's worth touching on is they're looking for a lot of consistent power. I think we all are. We all want, a reliable grid that gets us the power when we need it. But for data centers, they're looking for consistent power that they can run data center on constantly. And so that's why nuclear and natural gas are really attractive to them, and why when they look at something like wind or solar, they're also seeing like, okay, well, what can we do with batteries? Or can we, as a data center, use some crazy demand response wizardry to move around when calculations are being done in the data center so that we can kind of shave our own piece and balance out our own load. But so I guess a key piece of that and what they're trying to do is have the reliability of something like, like a nuclear plant or like a natural gas plant, something that's going to have the ability to provide a consistent power so that they can stay online. And it creates this kind of interesting tug of war with some of their sustainability commitments as well that we see. But I think one of the really good news is in this time of some crazy turmoil in terms of a political environment and in terms of our understanding of how these markets are going to be shifting over time is a few key areas of bipartisanship. So the first one I have listed there is onshoring manufacturing. So something that all sides of the political spectrum have aligned upon, at least the two major political parties, is this idea that we should be kind of driving forward domestic manufacturing, so batteries for either EVs or semiconductors, the CHIPS Act, and trying to prioritize kind of American production or allied production. That's something that aligns both with trying to stand up your own domestic energy supply, while also prioritizing some geopolitical implications. So that second one there, securing American leadership in AI and cloud computing, kind of goes hand in hand with the first. It's looking at how can we capture this whole supply chain, the whole vertical line down from where we actually are building a battery or a semiconductor and turning that into kind of the final product. And then the last piece with energy security, also something that within this broader demand signal, it's something that I think we're all aligned on, which is exciting to see. But so there's huge demand. There's customers that want to buy as much power as they possibly can. How are they doing that? Well, in deregulated electricity markets, businesses, homes, and cities have the ability to shop around to select the retail energy provider of their choice. So there's a lot of different ways that you can procure power. Some of them are more localized, so you can imagine community solar or on-site projects. These are some of those types of behind-the-meter projects where they're directly tied to where the energy is going. But there are also a lot of other options. So for Invenergy, kind of the bread and butter is these off-site power purchase agreements, or PPAs, as well as build transfers, which is just the building and sale of the asset. But with a power purchase agreement, you have a really interesting commercial mechanism where essentially, if we go back to our pool, essentially, if I'm an energy buyer and I want to buy energy, and I'm really worried about all these crazy things that are happening in the market, these fluctuations and all these new data centers coming online, and geopolitical stuff, how can I make sure that I'm protected against market changes going forward? And a PPA is really interesting because it says you can contractually agree to a fixed price where you know what your price is going to be for X number of years in the future, 15, 20, 25 years. And then the generator will provide the power, they'll dump their bucket into the pool, you'll get yours out of the pool, and then you just square up and agree on the agreed upon price. And because it's just the financial agreement, regardless of how much energy is actually going into the grid from the generator, PJM is getting the energy buyer their bucket, so they get what they need, and they pay the amount that they need to pay. And then the generator puts theirs into the pool. If they're unable to, then it's on the generator to kind of find some other supplier to meet the energy that's supposed to be putting in. And so it's a really interesting arrangement that's enabled some of these big corporate buyers in particular to get comfortable with long-term energy contracts because they're able to hedge against risk from volatile markets. The other one I have up here is utility green tariffs. So in a lot of places where there might be more stringent markets, or like a regulated market where you have to work directly through a utility, these green tariffs are an interesting new way that buyers are looking at navigating and working with their utility to say, hey, can I sleeve a deal through you to a renewable energy generator because I want the renewable power and I want to be able to access it directly, and the three of us kind of get together and figure out an arrangement where I can partner using your systems to get to the renewable project that I'm interested in. And so it's a really cool time because there's so many challenges, as we talked about, lots of things to navigate, but people are working on it, and people are in real time hammering out ways that different organizations and entities can kind of get together and try to solve the problems in real time so that the projects we're building can get interconnected to the grid and maintain reliability for us all. And that's all I got. So thanks, everybody.